The past dozen years have taught me that being a vagabond is not defined by distance traveled. A vagabond looks upon the world as a field of potential and possibility. Vagabonds rove, enticed by risk, restless if we linger, fueled by curiosity and a sense of wonder. Tim Curry died yesterday, and I'm not typically one to get involved with celebrity worship, even though I do admire plenty of them, like Tim Curry, Elton John, and plenty of other people I'll eventually talk about on this show called Book Club. But Tim Curry, without question, was one of those creatives that always was around in my life from a very young age all the way up till now. And he's one of those people that just embodied any role he was in, but he still brought his own little personal flavor to what the role was. And he was unmistakably Tim Curry. So when I heard of his passing yesterday, I was already going to talk about this book probably in another month or two, but when I heard about his passing yesterday, I immediately knew I had to start talking about him. And normally with a lot of these episodes, I'll do a decent amount of prep, look into the background and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't have to do that with this episode because I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. Granted, this might go a little off the cuff here and there, but Tim Curry is just such a part of my life that I don't need an outline or a script or anything. I can just talk about him, for hours basically. So, kind of like with the first book club when I talked about Elton John's autobiography, this is his memoir, which came out late last year. This is going to be partially, yes, a discussion about the book, but also more so about the person himself, especially in light of his passing yesterday. So, without further ado, I'm going to put it over to commercial break for just a second so I can kind of reset. And then we're going to start talking about Tim Curry. So, in the meantime, I just hope you don't shiver with Antissa.
Uh, Flash. That was Thunderbolt.
Welcome back. So, as far as starting with the book Vagabond, I'll just say yes, absolutely read it. I mean, everything you think you know about Tim Curry, you're going to try and learn through this book. But even right off the bat, Tim Curry basically says, this is not meant to be salacious. This is not a tell all of dirty secrets. This is just his recounting of his own life in the most straightforward way possible. But granted, he does also sprinkle in some fun little stories here and there. And I think that's probably what I appreciated the most about this memoir is that it was not exaggerated in any way. It was a very blunt, just kind of overview of his life, but in a way that I really appreciated, where he wasn't trying to sugarcoat anything. He talked about his ups, he talked about his downs, and the nice thing about it is he weaved a nice tale where it wasn't some over the top retelling making him seem like always the good guy or the bad guy or anything like that. It was more just he went through his life, experienced what he did. He sort of fell into things from time to time, but he ultimately made the best of it. And especially because of his earlier upbringing of being sort of a military brat, moving around, that sort of thing. And I think the fact that this book is called Vagabond, which he describes himself as, is the perfect word for it because it's really about somebody who is just adventuring for the sake of it. Doesn't matter how much money he's making or what riches he gets or anything like that. He's just kind of going through life, expressing himself in the only way he knows how to, and then moving on to the next thing. And I feel like in recent years, I've certainly related to that sentiment more than I probably realized, which is why when I read this, when it came out late last year, it was, as much as I loved the Elton John autobiography that I talked about last time, this one probably hit closer to home for me because I just related so hard. Not obviously because I'm a movie star or anywhere near as talented as Tim Curry was, but just purely how you view life. And over the course of my life, well before I sort of started looking into Tim Curry, I always found myself wanting to go out of my comfort zone, travel across the world on a whim, meeting new people, kind of putting myself in the deep end and seeing if I could swim to, shore basically. And for many people, that's extremely uncomfortable and they never want to do something like that. But for me, I found fun in that. I really liked pushing myself in lots of different ways to meet new people and try new things. And that's once again kind of what this book is about is you learn that Tim basically, of course most people know him from Rocky Horror. That's certainly the shirt I'm wearing now and probably where I'm going to love him the most, but even for something like that, that was kind of something Richard O'Brien, the creator, found in Tim, but Tim sort of made it his own little spin on it based off his personality and people he met. Like, I think the fun story was he took the accent of Dr. Frankenfurter from some posh woman on a bus in London and then just made that his own little flair to the role. And wouldn't you know it, people now remember it, right? But then, well after Rocky Horror, he would of course go on to do other roles. Like he was Pennywise for It, and Stephen King, which was a terrifying watch. I still think it's worth watching, even with the latest remake. But it's still terrifying. But Tim does a wonderful job as Pennywise. And then you, of course, have the Clue movie where he played the butler, and that was a wonderful act, and that he sort of put his own fun little spin on that. Home Alone 2, that's a good role for him. I could go on and on about his different roles, basically, but the point is, he always tried different roles and wanted to stretch himself and put himself into weird situations that maybe wouldn't have been the best bet. Like another. Oh, actually, how could I forget Legend? The not the music, sorry, the makeup that he got had to put on himself took like I don't know 10 hours a day plus just to get that ridiculous demon costume on. And I think he actually had to go to the hospital for it or something like that. He talks about his experience there and how that's probably the worst he ever had it in terms of setup. But he stretched himself, tried something new, and now once again, it's a memorable role. And then Muppet Treasure Island is another fun one. Now that I think about it, Scary Movie 2. Sorry, I'm just rambling off movie names instead of talking about the book. But I mean, just every one of his performances was a classic. But the interesting part that I actually, to get back on track for a second, the interesting part about this that he also talks about is when his movie roles started drying up a little bit in terms of being like a leading man of sorts. That's when I believe it was his agent was able to get him some ins with Nickelodeon and other, or this may have been pre Nickelodeon actually, but he did some voice acting. But eventually, for people who don't know, he ended up being the voice of Nigel Thornberry on the Wild Thornberries, and he became instantly recognizable there. So that then turned kind of a new era of his career where he started voicing characters in animated features. And so you can be a vagabond, I'll say, in your real life and being adventurous and things like that. But I would say he also took that mindset for his career, which I think is an inspiration for me too, of being creative, going outside your comfort zone, all that kind of stuff. As much as I hate to talk about it, it is part of his history, which is in 2012, he had a stroke. And for a little while, he was basically unable to move, talk, do anything like that. But thankfully, a couple years after that, he was able to regain a little bit of movement, and then more speaking engagements happen as he gained the ability with his face and everything like that. So, towards the mid 2010s to 2020, he was able to finally start going out there again, not really acting per se, other than like a random maybe cameo and something. But he was able to at least thankfully kind of put himself out there again, and people remembered him and he appreciated it when in interviews, and he was always had his funny sense of humor and wit about him, which I thought was great. And once again, if you read this book, you're going to definitely see that in terms of his humor and wit and bluntness. Like he's a funny dude. I mean, you could probably guess that just from watching his roles, but um, if you read this book, you're definitely going to get appreciation for that as well, which is nice. But even during all of that time and him talking about that stroke, he had positive spirits. The people around him were supportive. I mean, obviously, he had his down times too, because how could you not in that situation? But he was able to thankfully still persevere for a number of years, probably well past what doctors thought he was going to be able to um, live through. But obviously, as you get older and um, something like a stroke takes its toll on your body, eventually, it was going to be his time to go. And I kind of knew for a number of years, I think most people did, that he was already on borrowed time of sorts. And so, I shouldn't say I'm surprised that he finally passed away, but I feel like once again, this is one of those actors, or it could be a musician, actor, who author, it doesn't matter, whatever creative person you relate to the most. He was one of those people where I just, for so long, couldn't imagine what it would be like to be in a world without him. And today is that day. So, what I would recommend, obviously, is to read this book. Even if you're not the biggest Tim Curry fan, I think there's a lot you'll take away from it. And this is something that I think should be on anyone's bookshelf, especially if you're into autobiographies. But if you do love Tim Curry, you are absolutely going to love this book. Um, it gives you such an appreciation for his life, where he came from. And if you're like me, you'll quickly realize how much you took away from his performances. Even, it's not like I ever thought I was going to meet the dude, like with most celebrities, but he was someone who just had such an impact on my life from a young age all the way up till now, and frankly until the day I die as well. Like, he's just that much of an influence on my life. And I feel like, there's no one that will ever be another Tim Curry. Like, we will never have another one. And just like with Rocky Horror, I mean, sorry, not to go on a tangent here for a second. I know there's been attempts to make new Rocky Horrors and tellings of it in different theater stage shows. There's never going to be another Dr. Frankenfurter as well. I mean, he is such a perfect casting for that role, so why bother? But then that gets okay. There's a motorcycle going right there. We're gonna keep it in. We're doing it live. Doesn't matter. Anyways, he was such a legend that you're never gonna replace Dr. Frankenfurter, but you're also never gonna replace Tim Curry. He was a one of a kind, and I think recently I've gotten more creative with myself in making different shows and putting myself out there more because of people like him. And I don't think I quite realized how much of an impact he had on me until recently. And it's just something that I'm going to keep with me for the rest of my life. So, to be honest, I printed out a whole bunch of other quotes that I was going to read along the way, but I kind of forgot them just because I started rambling. But I do want to read one more before we go. And it's really about um, something I've talked about before, and some of the other shows on Channel 3 also talk about. But this is where he kind of thought about himself too. I find little reward lingering in nostalgia, living gig to gig for the better and worse part of half a century. I have grown accustomed to appreciating and accepting lessons offered, then looking forward to the next challenge. That's the vagabond's way. So I think that sums up Tim Curry's life pretty nicely, where he never truly looked back. He even talked about how he loved his fans and everything that he has been afforded because of them, but you never saw him talking about, going back and doing another sequel or a remake or something from the past. He was always looking for that next challenge. And I feel like, especially lately for me, that's kind of summarized my life. I'm always looking for the next challenge, whether it's in a creative sense or other professional sense or life or anything like that. This is something that I'm going to be probably doing for the rest of my life. And I think that's why one of my mottos I tend to have is the day that I stop learning, that's the day that I start dying. And I think that's also why the word vagabond probably now applies to me. If I were to describe my life in one word, it's probably vagabond. And I feel like that has a negative connotation, but it doesn't. It has a very, there's actually an optimistic connotation to it of trying to explore life and just living it to the fullest, basically. So, to sum it up, read the book, watch his movies, remember him in whichever way you can. Actually, the other day, I got the 4K Blu-ray Steelbook of Rocky Horror that I'm finally going to watch. The next midnight showing, I'm sure, at all the theaters across the world for Rocky Horror showings are going to be fully packed, which, by the way, if you have not gone to one of those, highly recommend it. Midnight showing with a shadow cast, and they do all that kind of fun reenactment with you. So I'm sure this year's is going to be insane with his passing. Probably a lot of you know parties and celebration, basically, or to honor him, I should say. But yeah, sorry, this one was a little bit more rambly. This was more off the cuff, given obviously that he just died. But I'm hoping you found some kind of use out of this. If you're anything like me, maybe you'll be inspired to read this and then start creating things on your own. Um, but regardless, R.I.P. Tim Curry. You're a legend. You were in legend, but you'll always be around. And I know until the day I die, whenever that might be, uh, you're somebody I'll always be inspired by.